TikTok, time to rock. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone who's watching from all over the world. I'm your host tonight, D Wood, aka The Dizzle. With me is, I guess you kind of started this all, didn't you? Aren't you the one who started this? Studying jihad. I know there were people who studied jihad before you, but as far as like getting other people to understand it in the West, in that kind of you.
You know, you may be right. Actually, I can't think of anybody before that. There were people doing different things, Batya Orr on Dimitude and Emerson on the actual jihad activity, but not the theology.
Yeah, and what I mean is like no, most people never heard of any of those people. You know what I mean? Most people weren't familiar with that. A very small group of people, usually who have an academic interest in Islam, were familiar with some of the stuff. Whereas you came out and you started blasting it on the internet and sort of popularizing facts about jihad and how Muhammad's teachings are relating to what we see all around us, and not just that. It's that that in the West, we were generally only familiar with an attack when it was like 9/11, when it was right up in our face. And we weren't familiar with what's going on with Christians in Pakistan or in India or Africa or the rest of the Middle East. We just weren't familiar with those kinds of things until you and later a couple other people started putting it out on the internet.
Yeah, I think that's true, because actually that's why I started Jihad Watch. I wanted to, at jihadwatch.org, ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to have a place where I could find all the jihad news, but it didn't exist. So I had to make it myself.
And it reminds, it's very similar situation to your book, History of Jihad, in that you basically cover in that book the entire, what it sounds like, the history of jihad from Muhammad down to our time. And even people like me, we've talked about this before, even people like me who study Muhammad's teachings and so on, when I think about jihad and what I've learned about jihad, before reading your book, it's basically you learn about what Muhammad taught, you learn about what the Quran says, you learn about what's in the Hadith and in the Sirah, and then maybe some stuff from the four rightly guided caliphs. And after that, 9/11 and the 7/7 bombings and things like that. And then you read the history of jihad and you realize, wait a minute, we're just leaving out 12 to 13 centuries. And you see just how relentless it's been. It's just the jihadis never stop. They just keep coming for you and wearing you down. But I say that because it reminds me of what's going on in the world today, that we're only familiar with a very small portion of the terrorist attacks that happen because we just focus on what's happening sort of close to home. Or maybe if it's something big over somewhere else, then we'll pay attention to it. But if people follow your site, then they see it's nonstop. It's every day, over and over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think most people still, because most people, of course, don't read Jihad Watch, they have no idea of the jihad activity that's going on all the time. But another interesting thing about the history of jihad, David, is I don't think the Islamic apologists have caught up with that book yet and caught up with the whole concept. As a matter of fact, there was some guy who was making videos refuting the book and talking about how evil and stupid I am. And he did the first chapter about Muhammad and found supposedly all these things wrong with it, and then stopped. And he never dealt with the chapters of the history of jihad, because this is not something that either side has been discussing. Mm-hmm. And I think it's devastating. You never see Islamic apologists coming out and saying the history of Islam has been peaceful and tolerant and so on. They can't say it. They say it about Spain maybe, but even that you see less and less. But they can't sustain it. And so I think it's a very rich vein that has not been explored yet to its sufficient possibilities.
Yeah, and it's a situation we see over and over again with Muslim apologists in the West. They can only say what they're saying in an atmosphere of ignorance. They can only make the claims that they make about Islam and their prophet and their book in an atmosphere where people don't know anything about their book. So they can come up and say, hey, you believe in women's rights here in the West? Did you know that Muhammad was the champion of women's rights and that he was the greatest feminist of all time? Did you know that? Oh, you like science here in the West? You guys are big on science over here. Did you know that Islam, I mean, the Quran is a fount of science and it just produced the scientific, blah, 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 right? They can say whatever they want because people don't know better. And that all changes. That all changes once you have an informed population. And so that's why sites like Jihad Watch are so important. And that's why it's important to be discussing this stuff right here on YouTube. All right, so we're going to talk about this week in Jihad. And notice, I mean, apart from what happened in Pakistan, I haven't heard anything from any main news sites. I mean, they may have covered some things, but nothing that sort of jumps in your face. So this has been a really, really, really slow week for Jihad compared to 9/11 or something like that. And yet, I'm willing to bet that since you're covering this stuff every day, there's a ton of stuff that everyone's missing. But why don't we go and start with the one that people may have heard about, and that's the killing of a factory manager in Pakistan. What have you heard about that?
Well, he was a Sri Lankan, and he was working in Pakistan, as you noted, and was accused of throwing pages of the Quran into the garbage. Now, since I cover this all the time, I know that this is a very common charge that is made in Pakistan, and often it's actually even been shown to have been faked, that the local imam put a page of the Quran into the trash and then accused somebody. This has happened more than once in recent years in Pakistan. So we don't know the circumstances of how this Quran page got in the trash, or even if there was one, but this fellow was accused of putting it in there, was absolutely brutally tortured. There are videos on the internet that are just stomach churning of him being dragged through the streets, kicked and abused even after death, and then burned. The body is burned. Actually, I believe he was burned alive. Yes, and they're chanting that this is what happens to those who insult the Prophet, and so on. Even worse, Pervez Khattak, I believe the defense minister of Pakistan, I have it here somewhere. In any case, the defense minister of Pakistan, Pervez Khattak, he said, well, kids will do things out of emotions. You can't fault them for getting angry with all this.
Boys will be boys. That was that old Gillette. That was that Gillette commercial. Boys will be boys, because some kids were rustling.
And this is really a commonplace thing in Pakistan. Mm-hmm. And there have been absolutely horrific murders and people being tortured to death and so on accusations of blasphemy. Probably a lot of people are familiar with the case of Asia Bibi, who was on death row for years in Pakistan on false accusations of blasphemy and was ultimately released. And then the whole the Islamic groups in the country were baying for her blood, were searching house to house for her, and she managed to escape. This is the situation that minorities in Pakistan, Hindus, Christians, and others have to live with. And of course, this is why they're so diminishing.
And I would just like to read one passage that I've talked about a couple of times this week. Just want to read one passage from Sunan Abu Dawud, because it's the source of these problems. And what you'll find over and over again from the Muslim sources is that this modern idea that all this has nothing to do with Islam, when you can see exactly how it's related to Islam, it's just a very, very silly idea that, again, can only be spread in an atmosphere of ignorance. But this is Sunan Abu Dawud, number 4361. This is a Sahih narration, so throw it out at your own peril. It was narrated that Ikrimah said, Ibn Abbas told us that a blind man had a female slave who had borne him a child, so he got his slave girl pregnant like Muhammad did, who reviled the Prophet and disparaged him. And he told her not to do that, but she did not stop. And he rebuked her, but she paid no heed. One night she started to disparage and revile the prophet. So he took a dagger and put it in her stomach and pressed on it and killed her. There fell between her legs a child who was smeared with the blood that was there. The next morning, mention of that was made to the prophet, and he assembled the people and said, "By Allah, I adjure the man who did this to stand up." The blind man stood up and came through the people trembling, and he came and sat before the prophet. He said, "O messenger of Allah, I am the one who did it. She used to revile you and disparage you, and I told her not to do it, but she did not stop, and I rebuked her, but she paid no heed. I have 2 sons from her who are like 2 pearls, and she was good to me. Last night she started to revile you and disparage you, and I took a dagger and placed it on her stomach, and I pressed on it until I killed her." The prophet said, "Bear witness that no retaliation is due for her blood." And the thing that I pointed out recently in a video is that the witness against the woman is the guy who killed her, right? And so, Muhammad shows up and he hears, "There's been a murder." What? There's been a murder? Who's murdered? That girl over there. Oh, a murderer? Hey, let's get to the bottom of this. What happened? What happened? Let's investigate. What happened? The guy comes forward. "Oh yeah, she was saying a bunch of bad stuff about you, Muhammad." "Oh, okay, then you're fine then." Now notice, the only testimony against the girl is the testimony of the guy who killed her, who could have killed her for anything. He could have killed her for anything and just made that up. Or he could be killing her because she actually said something about Muhammad. Keep in mind, he did kill the mother of his children for making fun of Muhammad. So that would be bad enough. But even worse, if she didn't actually do any of it, he killed her for some other reason. And then he just simply claimed, "Oh, the reason I had to brutally murder her was that she said this awful thing about you, Muhammad." Now notice the precedent that sets when Muhammad said, "Oh, you're good then. You're good then because you killed her for saying something bad about me." It sets the stage for, oh, I'm having a disagreement. If I want to kill somebody, or I want to rile up a mob to kill somebody, all I have to do is say they insulted Muhammad, or they insulted the Quran, and the mob will take care of it. Or if I kill the person, I say, hey, that person's no longer able to defend himself or herself because I killed the person. Or even if the person is alive, if it's a Christian or a Hindu, that Christian or Hindu's testimony is not as valuable as mine. I'm the one defending the prophet. Who are you going to believe? And so you just end up with a situation in Pakistan. It never stops. And it's directly because of Muhammad. It's directly the fault of Muhammad setting this precedent.
Absolutely. No doubt about it. And the determination of Western authorities to ignore the absolute 100% one-to-one connection with Islamic teaching in this story, as well as in so many others, is a great deal of the reason why we're in so much trouble these days. These things all happen in Pakistan because of Islamic teachings. And Islamic teachings are really quite clear and consistent, as you know, and then they are acted upon by Muslims in a clear and consistent way. It's really not hard. It's not a difficult thing. I got another story here for you from India about this man who is a very prominent Muslim in India. Rizvi is his name, Wasim Rizvi, and he converted to or reverted to Hinduism. And then a very prominent Muslim politician, Feroz Khan, offered 5 million Indian rupees, which is about $66,000, which is actually considerably greater amount of money there than it would be considered to be here.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of money there.
Yeah, for the head, and also it's been augmented since then, actually. For the head of Rizvi, he actually said, "Get his severed head to me." And of course, we know why this happened, because Muhammad said, if anyone changes his religion, kill him. And then there is the Quran saying, when you meet the unbelievers, strike their necks. So this Muslim politician, a very prominent individual in the Congress Party in India, he actually feels free to absolutely out in the open say, bring me this man's severed head, and I will give you this amount of money, this large amount of money. And we know, here again, it's all because of Islamic texts and teachings.
And one of the interesting things that's happened recently, I'm talking in the past 5 years or so, is you remember this and I remember this. Some of the younger people here might not remember this. But Robert, let's say in 2000, 2007, 2008, 2009, when we would say, you and I would say, hey, in Islam, the penalty for leaving Islam is death. What would people call us?
You racist, bigoted Islamophobe. How could you say that? Islam is a religion of peace and tolerance. The Prophet, when he was insulted, would respond in a loving and kind manner. When there was a woman who reviled him, a Jewish woman who reviled him every day as he went out to the mosque, one day she wasn't there, and he inquired after her health because he was so kind. See, I could actually argue. We should do a debate, where we one of us is the Muslim.
Yeah.
We could probably argue better than they could.
Yeah, and so so we're talking just 10 years ago, 12 years ago, 13 years ago. If you gave anything remotely resembling straightforward factual information from the Muslim sources, factual information and interpretations backed up by 14 centuries of Muslim scholars, you were called a racist, Islamophobic, hate-mongering bigot, and you're a horrible person, and no one should ever listen to you. But one of the things that's happened recently, just over the past few years, is that far more mainstream, popular Muslim apologists are now admitting it. So Ali Dawa had his famous, yes, of course, the capital punishment will be applied to you. There's no doubt, and we're proud of that, right? So, I mean, he's saying it.
Yeah.
Daniel Hakikachu, he admits that the death penalty. Muhammad Hijab, he tried to tweak it a little bit and say that you could exile people instead, but he faced a backlash for that. And so it's just amazing that things that we said just a few years ago and were called racist for, now they're saying in public on YouTube, and they're getting cheered on. Yes, tell him, brother, tell them what will happen to them in an Islamic state. With like, wait a minute, how's I racist for saying exactly what your guys now are saying? And so it's an interesting situation.
Well, it was all a tactic, of course, all from the beginning, designed to disarm, discredit, destroy, marginalize the opposition. And they actually did succeed in that to some degree, in the sense of driving any honest discussion of jihad or the ideology behind jihad or Sharia out of the mainstream. But that has only made them become more emboldened, and so they don't need to use these tactics so much anymore. And now they are, as you note, proving us right, proving our points over and over again.
And I also think that part of it, so part of it is what you just said. I think there's another part of it in that a lot of their apologists are kind of getting desperate in the sense that they know that even their own scholars are saying that there are now millions of ex-Muslims in Muslim countries, millions of Muslims who've left Islam and are keeping it quiet because they don't want to face a backlash from other Muslims. But there are all these Muslims leaving Islam, and it's a similar situation to what you have with the West being so powerful in the modern world. Is that, once the Ottoman Empire fell, if you're a Muslim, you're sitting here thinking, wait a minute, what just happened? This is not how it's supposed to be. We're supposed to expand and expand and expand until we dominate the entire world. And these guys just crushed us. And they're getting more powerful and we're just getting weaker and weaker. What is going on here? This is not the way things are supposed to be. And so one conclusion to draw is, well, maybe this stuff is not true. Maybe Islam is not true. And it's not this superior ideology that's going to give us victory over all other people. That's one way to go. And so, you did see a lot of Muslim countries and individuals trying to westernize, trying to adopt Western practices and so on to try and modernize. But the other conclusion to draw is Allah just isn't with us because we're too watered down. We're too lukewarm. He's not blessing us. He's not going to bless us to take over the world because we're not faithful enough to the core teachings of Islam. And so you had that then, and I think you're kind of getting it now. Why are all these Muslims all over the world apostatizing and so on? Maybe it's because it's not because Islam is false and people are recognizing it. You can't believe that if you actually believe in Islam. Maybe it's because we're presenting this whitewashed, westernized version of Islam, and that's what our apologists and scholars are presenting to the West. and Allah's just not blessing us and people are leaving Islam. So maybe what we need to do is really crack down. Yes, we're here to oppress women. Yes, we're here to subjugate you. Yes, we're here to do all. I think it's like a Hail Mary at the end of a game, because really looks like things are about to fall apart for you.
It looks like that in so many ways. It reminds me, as you're talking about the fiasco with the various versions of the Quran, and Yasser Qadi saying there's absolutely no difference in any of the manuscripts. It's exactly the same. And of course, in that he was only repeating, as many others have pointed out, he was only repeating what many Islamic apologists have insisted for decades. But now they can't sustain it because the internet is so readily available to anybody in the world. You can see the variant readings. And now they're starting to admit the variant readings, but it doesn't fit the theology. And so I have, working on my new book that's coming out, The Critical Quran, that notes variant readings. It's amazing to me that there are these guys who are saying, yes, you're so stupid and evil, of course. You don't understand. Of course there are differences, but Allah has protected it all from error. So all the differences are all correct. Yeah. And this is a ludicrous and impossible position to sustain, but it shows that you have this community in real deep crisis now. I don't mean all of Islam, but certainly the Islamic apologists as a group, they don't know how to deal with these things and are perhaps driven out of the same kind of desperation to deal with that, to become more radical and just double down.
Yeah, and the apologists and scholars, they really set themselves up for this fall, in that they used arguments that only worked in an atmosphere of ignorance. You could only say, Muhammad's a great champion of women's rights, and the Quran's been perfectly preserved, and the Quran is filled with scientific miracles. You can only make these claims if you're talking to a bunch of people who don't know anything about Muhammad and don't know anything about the Quran. And so they use these arguments to popularize their religion and to build up the faith of Muslims who haven't studied their sources and so on. And then all of a sudden, you start getting in an atmosphere that's not completely ignorant, right? Where people are able to look things up that you say, and they're scrambling. What do we do now? People are actually looking up what we say, and we make this claim, and then people actually look it up. And so they haven't really been in this situation before, and they're scrambling. They're in panic mode. But then they give responses, which is what you were they give responses that also only work in an atmosphere of ignorance, right? So for years, I mean, I have multiple Muslim apologetics books over here that claim not one difference in any Quran manuscript ever. Same.
It was a common claim up until quite recently. And now they're in such confusion and retreat about it that now I was actually repeating this on Twitter and quoting Qadi, and they're saying nobody ever thought that there was only one version of the Quran. You're an idiot for thinking this.
Yeah, now you're an idiot for saying what every single Muslim apologist, including Yasser Qadi, was saying years ago. I have a clip of Yasser Qadi that was made for that Why Islam series, and he didn't quite say from the time of Muhammad, but he said from the time of Uthman, not one letter's difference anywhere in the Quran, and he knew that was a lie. That's a scholar. He knew that was a lie. He spread the lie anyway because he knew that if you didn't spread the lie, you'd get blasted for telling the truth. And so you had, they would spread all these lies, but then as soon as people start catching on that this is a lie, wait a minute, here's 2 pages of the Quran, and that's clearly different from that. That is clearly different from that in these 2 different versions of the Quran. Now it's, oh yes, but it's always been that way, that it was revealed in these multiple ways, and then Allah revealed it in all those ways, and so yes, that's all the one Quran. And keep in mind, this Quran is not the same as this Quran, and yet they're both the one Quran. These are the people who object to the Trinity, right? These are the same people who think the Trinity is a ridiculous idea, right? But now it's, oh yes, but there's no differences in meaning, and there's just but now they're spreading responses that only work in an atmosphere of ignorance, and now people are going to learn responses to expose their responses. And it seems like they're just going to have to keep backtracking and changing their answer, hoping that they can delay everyone long enough that they actually subjugate the world and can chop your head off for bringing this stuff up.
It could happen with the way things are going. I can tell you about very much increased aggression in Europe. And just this week, We have, for example, out of Germany, a story. Muslims were praying outside in the entrance to a courtyard. This was a actual thoroughfare. A man was trying to drive his car out of the courtyard and asked them to let him move to let his car through, and they instead savagely beat him. And of course, we understand that this has to do with the exigencies of Islamic prayer and the effrontery of an infidel in interrupting it. And so he got what he deserved as per Sharia. In France, meanwhile, there's a presidential candidate, Eric Zemmour, who is talking about recovering French culture and identity and so on. And the Islamic population of France is very hostile to him. But he has a supporter, an aide, actually, Tanguy David, who is a black man. And so he has been getting incredible threats from Muslims, most of which involve a lot of racial epithets that I'm not going to repeat here, but at the same, one of them, the guy said to him, "Wallah, we're going to behead you." And here again, in both these cases, you have the supremacism of Islam, the aggression of Islam, the violence of Islam. And of course, "Wallah, we're going to behead you" comes from 47:4, when you meet the unbelievers, strike their necks, in the Quran. And the imperative to strike terror into the hearts of the enemies of Allah, which of course they think Zemmour is an enemy of Allah, and thus Tanguy David must also be an enemy of Allah.
And so you're saying that the followers of the man who bought, owned, sold, and traded black African slaves, and who referred to Ethiopians as raisin heads, and who said that the one who would eventually destroy the Kaaba would be a black man, that they've ended up with some racism? That's strange. I thought that this was the... I mean, I get everything I know from Malcolm X, so that didn't... I'm not familiar. I'm not familiar with all that stuff in Islam. All right. Well, what else has been going on?
Also, this week,
you covered Germany, and you covered an instant from France, but it seems like a lot, like it's especially relentless in France. It seems like, just because of the percentage.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. Another incident in France this week: a Muslim who was known to the police, which probably means that he was being violent in the past. He called up a police station, which I'm not sure this was very wise, but you do you, as they say. He was known to the police. He called up the police station, and according to a report from Actu 17, a French language newspaper.
Hey, did you say Act 17?
Actu 17.
Oh, okay, Act 17. I thought I said Act 17 there.
ACTU. I'm sure it's probably the same thing, but they've used your name, David.
They stole my name. I got to copyright that.
And they say that he ranted about the Islamic State, or ISIS, and about Allah, and said that he was going to blow everything up, and was waiting for the police to come for him. He was waiting with weapons for the police to come for him. That was one story out of France. Another one is that a plot was foiled of Muslims who planned to murder passersby in popular places in the weeks leading up to Christmas, and to strike terror into the hearts of the unbelievers in that way. Also, regarding Eric Zemmour, the presidential candidate I mentioned a minute ago, he had a rally for his campaign, and Muslims crowded outside the arena screaming Allahu Akbar. And among the people trying to get into the arena, there were confiscated Molotov cocktails, knives, and a hand grenade. And so Zemmour actually was gotten in a headlock by somebody on his way into that rally, and it does seem as if he has enraged the Muslims in France as well as other forces there. And so who knows what will be coming next in terms of his campaign, but there's already been a considerable amount of jihad activity connected with it.
And so this isn't like over a year. This is all just like...
This is the last week.
So this is, even in a slow week where we're not hearing anything about jihad, there is this just relentless pressure, right? It's just, there are people who are constantly coming after you, and you constantly have to be on guard. And you hope the government is catching these people before they carry out their plots. And
Yeah.
a
Oh,
lot of
speaking David,
a lot of times they do, and then sometimes they don't.
sometimes they don't.
Hmm.
That's another story from this week out of Belgium. They brought back, the Belgian government brought back 6 ISIS brides who were in a refugee camp in Syria.
Well, that's nice.
Well, you know, that's it's charitable on the part of the European governments. There's been a lot of pressure on the European governments to bring back the ISIS brides and their children. It's considered to be a humanitarian effort. A lot of times they've dissociated themselves from ISIS and so on. But
By the way, I just want to say this, because you are in this situation where you have these girls, some of them teenage girls, making these stupid decisions, going down, joining ISIS, and then they end up in these camps and so on. And then what do you do with them? Do you bring them back to their countries and so on? I just want to say, for those who have children, I am in favor of always bringing them back if Robert and I get to handle the education of their children. Fair is fair is fair. Fair is fair. And if you don't want us handling the education of their children, can we really be confident that you're not radical, right? You're not still radical, right?
this is the problem. I mean, this has been the controversy in Europe, but generally the people who are saying let's not bring these people back, they're a security risk, are being shouted down. They're being called racist, bigoted, Islamophobes, as always. And so they brought these 6 ladies back. One of them has already gone missing. And nobody knows where she is. Nobody knows what she's doing. But given the realities of the situation, I think it's very likely that she's up to no good. Otherwise, she would be happy to receive the good graces of the Belgian government in taking care of her and her children and so on. And so we don't have any idea what might be in the offing in Belgium in that regard. But this incident illustrates the risks of repatriating these people.
And just think, because, yeah, I mean, it's a rough situation. So, you have to lay out your arguments and, do you bring them back and then punish them and put them in prison, or what do you do? Very strange just bring them back and smack them on the wrist and let them go about their business, because, yeah, it's not a good idea. But, I mean, just think about the whole situation with ISIS and then, of course, the fallout later. It really exposes the stupidity of one common response that we got for years when we're pointing out, oh, look at this terrorist attack, look at that terrorist attack, look at this terrorist attack, look at that terrorist attack. And the response was, but what about, the terrorist attacks in Ireland back in the day? What about Westboro Baptist Church? What about Anders Breivik? What about these guys, right? And notice in every one of these situations, take Westboro Baptist Church, and they're going around. How many times do you see Christians from around the world say, wow, they got it right. Let's all flood over there and go join up with them. It's Christians around the world go, what the heck is up with those guys, right? Same thing with, where do you see Christians around the world going, oh man, I need to go join those terrorists in Ireland because they're the ones who are really getting the gospel right. They're the ones who are really preaching the true gospel there. You never see that. You never see that sort of thing, right? It's always, anywhere from any ideology, you can get some weird, peculiar offshoot centered around some charismatic nut job, right? Is that what you have in Islam? Notice what happens, right? You have a group that comes up in the Middle East, says, hey, we're the true Islam. We're going to go around slaughtering everyone in the name of Allah. And Muslims from around the world flock there. Not all Muslims. Most Muslims didn't go there. But still, Muslims in France, Muslims in the UK, Muslims in America. You always had this small percentage who thought the exact same way and wanted to go and join. So it's not just some peculiar local thing. There's something that is causing people from around the world to think in exactly the same way. What is it? I would argue, and I'm sure Robert would argue, it's because that's what's in the Muslim sources, and these people knew it. These people knew it. And so what do you want to do? You really want to spend your entire life living in a Kafir country when, my goodness, now you've got a new caliph who's actually enforcing authoritative, true, Orthodox Islam, or are you going to go live in an Islamic state? And if you're a girl, start making babies, these future lions of jihad. And so you have this flood of people and they all go out there. And then it falls apart. And then, oh, yeah, we don't really believe that stuff anymore because it fell apart. And
yeah,
then,
sure.
Yeah,
That's exactly what they said. As a matter of fact, whenever we have been able to see the communications of the people who joined ISIS, they all talk about wanting to live in the land of true Islam. Mm-hmm. And every communique of ISIS was all about Islam. And yet Western politicians, to a man and a woman, say ISIS has nothing to do with Islam. I think if we just had basic respect for these people, we would understand that we need to pay attention to what they're saying about themselves, and that would lead us back to Islam. And you would think that some official would think it and perhaps fruitful and illuminating to investigate whether Islam actually had anything to do with these things or not, because that might guide their future activities. But of course, this is all something that's racist, bigoted, and Islamophobic, even to contemplate.
Yeah, and you know what's strange? People do understand the relevance of what people believe to how they act in certain situations. Usually, if it's someone they really disagree with, and all of a sudden they understand it, right? Like if there's an insurrection on January the 6th at the Capitol, everyone, we have to look into their views. Why do these people come to this conclusion that this is a good idea to go and do that? Guess what? I agree completely. You want to look into that. What made them think that way? What made them want to do that? Of course, that's obvious. Suddenly we get to Islam, and you catch the jihadi, and the jihadi says, hey, Muhammad said, that he's made victorious with terror. We're told to fight those who do not believe. Muhammad said, I've been commanded to fight people until they say there's no God but Allah and that Muhammad is his messenger. So yeah, that's why I have to go out and fight. And they say, that's peculiar.
You must kill.
You must have been listening to Robert Spencer and his lies about your religion, because there's no way any of that stuff is in the Muslim sources. Well, can we look it up? No, of course not. It's not in there. I know it. How do you know it if you haven't looked it up? Shut up, racist! Right? It's insane. The whole world is insane right now.
The mental illness, yeah, absolutely. At Jihad Watch over the years, I have had hundreds of stories of actually jihadis screaming Allahu Akbar, making it very clear why they are doing what they're doing, committing some act of violence, and immediately they're sent to the psych ward. And it's all mental illness. And I think this is a dangerous game that European officials especially love to do this. And it's a dangerous game they're playing because they are essentially saying that core Islamic activity that is based on core Islamic teachings is mental illness. And, that sounds Islamophobic to me.
It does, because we'd have to conclude that Muhammad was mentally ill. And I mean, if you had good grounds for thinking anyone in this whole story is mentally ill, it would be Muhammad. I mean, this is the guy who originally thought he was demon possessed and then tried repeatedly to hurl himself off a cliff, and then claimed that he was delivering revelations from the devil, and then repeatedly claimed to be a victim of black magic that gave him delusional thoughts and false beliefs. And then you read about his revelations, how he received his revelations. It sounded like something out of an Exorcist film. So you could, but I mean, notice, because I don't know about you, Robert, but if I believed this was true, if I actually thought that this was true and from God, I'd be thinking, okay, how if I believe that this is from God, then okay, I'm going to be a jihadi here. So there are people who are just, you do have people who are crazy. You can have a crazy person in any ideology do something crazy. And just because someone carries out a jihad attack doesn't mean that person's not crazy. You'd have to look. A person could be crazy. What you can have is you can have certain people who are crazy, they're a little off, and then the imam takes advantage of him and fills his head to get him to go out and go on a killing spree and so on. So you have those kinds of situations and so on. But if you listen to a lot of these successful jihadis, it's just, this is what I'm commanded. You're a bunch of, you people, the rest of the world, you're the worst of creatures. That's Quran 98, verse 6. We're the best of peoples. That's Surah 3, verse 110. You're the worst, we're the best. Yet you have all this power, and the only way we had to fight you is by constantly terrorizing you. And so
Yeah.
that's what I'm going to do, and that's what I'm commanded to do. It's straightforward. There's no insanity involved. It's just I'm doing what I'm told by God.
Even the crazy ones may well also be motivated by Islamic Jihad, because remember in Surah At-Tawbah in Surah 9, 14 and 15, fight them and Allah will punish them by your hands and will soothe the breasts of the believers and satisfy their hearts. So see, if you're troubled, if you're sad and depressed and you're a Muslim, there's the promise right there that your heart will be soothed by Allah if you fight the unbelievers and allow Allah to use you as an instrument of his wrath in punishing them.
Jihad therapy.
It's absolutely true. And now, I see the video already.
Can you imagine? Oh man, I'm just feeling so depressed and miserable. What you need? Hey, we could have someone on a couch. I'm so miserable and depressed. What do I do, Doc? What do I do? Well, what you need is a little jihad therapy. Jihad therapy? What's that? Well, what you need to do is you need to go slaughter a bunch of unbelievers in the name of Allah, and you'll feel better. Gee, if that's the only medicine that'll work, that's that good Muhammad medicine. I'll try it, right? And then, bam, terror attack.
Okay, Islamicize Me Part 2. It's coming. Anyway, look, Muhammad Reza Tahiri Azhar was a student at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill in 2006. And he rented an SUV, drove it on campus, tried to run down as many students as he could. He didn't end up killing anybody, but he injured 9 people before he was stopped. He wrote a series of letters explaining why he did what he did. And those verses that I just quoted, 9, 14, and 15, were central to what he was saying. He said that he was a nominal Muslim, sinful, drinking, all these things. And when he realized that he wanted to dedicate his life to Allah, he was troubled because he thought that he was deep in sin and that the sin scales would outweigh his good deed scales. And so he knew that he could soothe his heart and feel better by undertaking an act of jihad. And so he did.
And that's something we've seen lots of times in the past when a jihadi will die terrorizing the unbelievers. And then we're told, but this wasn't a sincere Muslim because this person had been seen drinking and this person had been seen going to a club, not realizing that that is absolutely tied to why this person did the terrorist attack, right? Because the person had lived a lifestyle that is inconsistent with Islam, but this person still believed that Islam is true. And then the person starts wondering, well, gosh, I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble with Allah. And then finds out, well, you got one guarantee. One guarantee from Allah. If you die while fighting in a jihad, then you're good to go with Allah. Gosh, this is the only way I can be sure. I mean, what happens if I'm driving down the street tomorrow and I get killed in a car accident with all the stuff I've done? I'm going to hell unless I take care of this right now and die while slaughtering unbelievers in the name of Allah. So once again, it's a situation where it goes directly back to the teachings of Muhammad. These horrible things that people are saying have nothing to do with Islam are exactly what you would expect given the teachings of Islam.
Yeah, absolutely. And the promise of paradise that you noted to those who kill and are killed, chapter 9, verse 111. Also the hadith of Muhammad where they say, what's a deed greater than jihad? And he says, I can't think of one. Mm-hmm. So that's the big good deed that's going to outweigh all your bad deeds on the scales that you went jihad. And so it's the guys that are drinking and doing everything else, those are the ones that you should watch out for, really. Because if they turn, that is, if they decide that they've been living wrong, then this could be a dangerous and volatile situation.
Yep. All right. Well, anything else going on this week in the world of jihad?
Yeah, one more big one, David, from Bangladesh. Now, you should know that, you probably already do know, that in Bangladesh just a few weeks ago, there were large-scale riots of Muslims rioting and killing Hindus because a Quran was found in a Hindu temple. And the idea was that the Hindus had taken it there to dishonor Islam and to desecrate the Quran.
They're going to eat it. They're going to eat that thing. They're
Maybe
gonna
so.
they're gonna do some Koranagami and fold it up or something. They're gonna be doing something with it. So all right, someone's about to be in trouble here because of these Hindus who are obviously about to desecrate the Quran.
But then it came out
Uh-oh.
after the riots, after people have been killed, after all these houses and businesses have been destroyed. It comes out that a Muslim planted the Quran in the Hindu temple in order to incite the riot. Now, that was a few weeks ago. This past week, we have in Bangladesh, in the town of Habiganj, another Muslim who was caught going into a Hindu temple with a Quran. Now, it seems very likely.
I wonder why he would do that.
Exactly.
So it's basically a parallel with the situation that we talked about at the beginning, with the fact that in places like Pakistan, if you want to get someone killed, all you have to do is say, this person did this, and put some pages, sprinkle some burned Quran pages around the person's house or something like that, and you get the person killed instantly. And the real reason you didn't like the person was because he owned this little piece of property that you want or something like that. And so you get the person killed. And in other places, you just want to get a bunch of people killed and you really hate Hindus. And what's the way to do that? Oh, let me go plant a Quran or something over there and get a bloodbath. And gosh, this is notice, this wouldn't be a thing if it didn't work. Right? It wouldn't be a thing. Oh, the reason we had to kill that person is because he said such and such about Muhammad. If that didn't work, if that were not a successful way of getting away with murder, you wouldn't have it. You wouldn't have this going on all the time. Likewise, if people didn't riot because they heard, so and so's got a Quran, we need to riot and go on a killing spree. If that didn't happen, then you wouldn't have this situation going on. So it's similar to. I mean, you have actual people who have killed for, racial reasons or something in the U.S., but it's similar to a situation now where, hey, that if you fake a story about someone calling you a name or something like that, you get instant coverage because everyone wants to jump on it. So it's people are coming up with the fakes because the fakes are so successful very quickly. And then the problem is, well, now when a real story comes out, people don't believe it as much. And likewise, in the Muslim world, you've got, people who, hey, we can make a fake insult against Muhammad and then go on a killing spree over that. When you'd think, well, here's what's messed up. You'd think as a Muslim, well, we shouldn't do that because then when someone actually desecrates the Quran or actually mocks Muhammad, people aren't going to believe us because we tend to make stuff up and then go on killing sprees over nothing. But yeah, it sucks because that would be bad enough, going on a killing spree because someone actually did something to a Quran or something like that. But Robert, I just don't know I don't know what anyone can do about this because it goes back to Muhammad. Like if you were to say, hey, you can't kill someone. You can't kill someone for saying something about Muhammad. You can't do it. What you just went against Muhammad.
Yeah, there's no way to get. That's an impenetrable wall. As long as you believe that Muhammad is the prophet and that Muhammad ordered the killing of people who insulted him, then that's the end of the story. There's just no arguing with that. Who are you to say that you know better than the prophet? And so the real question is to challenge whether he's really the prophet, and whether these things are really something that are commands from God. And when you see something like this incident in Bangladesh, I think that's illustrative. Is it really something that God wants, that he wants you to destroy the Hindu community in Bangladesh? And of course, a lot of Muslims would say, well, yeah, that's exactly what he wants. And so we're just helping it go on. After all, Muhammad said war is deceit, and we're at war with these people. So of course we can plant a Quran in a temple to incite riots and get the Hindus killed. So here again, if you believe in Muhammad, you believe in Islam, then these things just follow. And that's what has to be challenged.
And you made a very important point there, that I'm sitting here thinking, okay, well, if you take Muhammad seriously when he lets a man get away with murder because the guy said, well, she said something about you. And you could apply this to almost everything. How do you get away? I mean, how do you get away from child marriage? How do you do something about it? When Muhammad himself, your ultimate moral example, had sex with a prepubescent 9-year-old girl. How do you actually get away from it? You can make laws against it in your country, but there's always that instability there, and people are just going to ignore the law.
Yeah, your man-made law doesn't trump the Sharia that comes from Allah and is divine and perfect. This day I have perfected your religion for you, the Quran says. Well, how are you going to change it and make it imperfect when it's already perfect? So what has to be challenged is the belief in Islam itself.
Yeah, so the only way to actually do away with these issues is to refute the claim that the Quran is the word of God and that Muhammad is a prophet of God. And what's amazing is, like, why would that be so incredibly offensive to these Western academics and journalists and so on? It's like, I mean, do you actually believe the guy's a prophet? Do you believe this guy who calls for the violent subjugation of the entire world and said it's you beat your wives into submission and you have sex with little girls? And do you really believe that guy's a prophet? No. Do you believe those things are good? No. So can we challenge him and say this guy's not a prophet? No! You can't ever do that. It's the worst thing in the world. It's the worst thing in the world. Really, the worst thing in the world is showing these people that they're following a prophet that you agree is a false prophet. You agree he's a false prophet. You just believe no one should know that he's a false prophet and people should go on believing in a false prophet. That's what you're saying? Yes, of course. You'll be a racist if you think anything else. Very strange world we live in.
Indeed.
All right, Robert. Well, any final thoughts? These last few minutes are yours. If there's anything else you'd like to cover from your side or any other thoughts at all.
That was all the news stories I've got for this week, but there's always more. Unfortunately, it never ends, and there's always even some that I can't get to every week. But it's incredible how much jihad activity continues. People don't realize. And so jihadwatch.org is your one-stop shopping site for all your jihad needs. And that is, except for the bombs and all that. We don't stock those.
Your one stop. People should cut out that little clip right there. Jihad Watch is your one-stop shop. They could get you shut down for
for all your jihad needs. Open 24 hours, 7 days a week, except on Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. Anyway, yes. The other news is, since we've got a couple minutes, I have this new book coming out. It was supposed to be out already, but it has unfortunately been delayed by paper shortages. It will now be out in May, and I'm hoping that that's going to be the end of this, and it will really be out in May. We'll see, but you can pre-order it at Amazon now.
And that's the Quran?
Mm-hmm. Yep, the Critical Quran. It's a translation of the Quran that is honest about everything that's in the book, whereas you will find many English translations try to obscure what is in the Quran. This is a very clear and honest translation, commentary from mainstream Islamic sources showing how the ordinary Muslims understand the various passages. Also noted are the variant readings that are so controversial that Yasser Qadi and so many others have been steadfastly for years denying even existed up until just a few months ago. And so this is a book that I think you will find very useful and illuminating and helpful in dealing with this with this ongoing challenge. And so you can pre-order that. It will be out in May, the Critical Quran.
Mm-hmm. And let me count here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm looking at 7 Bibles over on my shelf, different translations and so on, different study Bibles with different notes. I could go to any one of those Bibles and it will have notes on textual variants, right?
Yeah.
It will have notes on textual variants. You never see that with the Quran. You never buy a Quran and it gives you information on the textual variants, even though they're there, just like they're, ladies and gentlemen, anytime you have human beings copying long books by hand, you're going to get textual variants. Yeah. And textual critics even have names for the different kinds of variants. Like there's one where what happens if you have the same word in a passage, right? You have the same word that occurs close together in a passage. Well, you're copying, you get to this word, write it down, and then you look back and you go to the same word that occurred in the same context, and you keep copying from there. They have names for these different kinds of variants and so on. But again, you go to any, most Bibles that you would buy, study Bibles or something like that, would have notes indicating where you have any sort of significant textual variant. In Islam, they just don't do that, and it's just a sad situation where factual information about the Quran, factual information about Muhammad, you're not going to get it from your sheikhs and imams. You have to, isn't it a weird situation? Or if you want to learn anything about your prophet and your book, you have to come to Robert Spencer or someone else, because your leaders aren't going to tell you it. Huh?
Yeah, this is the Quran, like you're saying about the Bibles. It's got notes just exactly like that, where it says other manuscripts say this, and variant readings. And a lot of Muslims, when confronted with this nowadays, they say, well, these are all minor things, small changes. It's not important. Actually, it is very important because of the claim that the whole thing has been perfectly preserved. Mm-hmm. And this is clear evidence that it is not. I even have a couple of apocryphal surahs in there.
Oh, nice.
A couple of Shiite surahs that circulated that try to make the claim for the Shiites. So this is a real study Quran in the manner of study Bibles. And this is not, as you have noted, this is not something you're going to find very easily in the Islamic world.
Oh, well, I think we're going to have to do some videos when that's coming out.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, Robert Spencer, for keeping us all updated every day on your website and then here now. And everyone, let us know if you want us to continue, because seeing as how jihad never ends, well, we could just make endless live streams covering the events that go on in the world in the name of Allah. So be sure to go to Robert's website and visit that regularly. That'll keep you updated on jihad. It will help destroy that atmosphere of ignorance in which the claims of Muslim scholars and apologists can only thrive. And so follow that. And if you want to do some reading, if you really want to get the material down, definitely get a copy of Robert's book, The History of Jihad. Best book out there on jihad. And if you look at it and you say, wow, that book's kind of, what's that?
It's the only history of jihad.
Yeah.
There is no other book, at least maybe there is somewhere, but I don't know of it.
I said best book on jihad. Best book on jihad.
I appreciate that. Thank you. But there's no other history of jihad that covers the whole phenomenon of jihad from the beginning all over the world to now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I would recommend everyone read that. If you want to solve a lot of problems in the world, then make that information common knowledge. In other words, and people think, I can't do what Robert does. Right? You don't need to. You need to learn a couple things well, and share them with the people you know. That's how it spreads. That's how the information spreads. So I would encourage everyone to get that book. Even if you're looking at it and saying, there's no way I'm reading a long book like that. I mean, great. Get the first chapter down, or get the first 2 chapters down. Right? Get that information down. And then if you want to, then you can continue as far as you go. But it's pretty horrifying. All right. Thanks, Robert. And let us know if you guys want us to do this regularly. Catch y'all later.
Thanks very much, David.
Mm-hmm.